And we actually have one final keynote speech for today. We've got a guest with us, just warming himself up next door. Jeff Hawkins has joined us, founder of Palm and Grok. He's going to be giving a talk on brains, data, and machine intelligence. Not only is he the founder of Palm, also Handspring, architect of many products such as Palm Pilot and the Trio, it says here. Excellent, just checking the information. Said, no, that wasn't me. Yes, sir, it was. But in 2005, he co-founded Grok, where he hopes Grok is going to start to play a catalytic, there's a good word, catalytic role in the emerging field of machine intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Hawkins on the stage.
Here today. Is my microphone on? Can you hear me okay? Now it is. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was just here a couple of days ago in the Computer History Museum. I hope you all had a chance to go tour the exhibits downstairs. They're pretty cool. I'm going to talk about something very different, probably than anybody else talked about today. I'm going to start with a story. The story goes a number of years ago when Bill Gates was still CEO of Microsoft. He spoke at a middle school. And one of the students asked him a question. He said, Mr. Gates, do you think it would ever be possible to build a company as successful as Microsoft again? Is that, could anyone ever do that again? And he did not hesitate in his answer. He was very quick, and he said, absolutely. And this was his comment. He said, if you invent a breakthrough so computers can learn, that is worth 10 Microsofts. And I think it was a very astute comment. He wasn't just talking about some minor innovation. He was basically saying that computers have been, for 70 years or 60 years at that time, have been all built on a programmatic storage model that's set back in the 1930s and 1940s, and that there was another future wave that will be coming around when computers actually are learning machines. And it's a fundamental shift, and it's going to lead to a lot of new wealth and a lot of new creations. And I thought that was very, very astute observation. So I'm talking about computers that learn, and in Silicon Valley and other places I speak, I run into lots of people who are interested in this. They come from different directions. Some people come at it from the directions of semiconductors. These are people, what they talk about the end of Moore's law. They're worried about that we're going to reach a fundamental limit about how much we can scale semiconductors down, and they're looking for new architectures that allow them to extend beyond Moore's law, architectures that are fault tolerant, for example. And so they become interested in machines that learn. We have other people who talk about the post-von Neumann era. They were thinking like, oh, we're running out of applications that can take advantage of all this silicon we can put on a chip, all the processors and the cores. What are we going to do there? There are other people coming at it from big data. And just our last speaker was talking about big data. I'm sure that's been a topic all day for you. But when you think about big data, one of the problems is you need to have machines that can automatically learn and model the data. It's not something, it's just, you can't put analysts on all these things. And finally, there's a continuing interest in AI in the world. A new term that's been coming up recently is cognitive computing. And these are just people who recognize that computers don't do a lot of things that we as humans and other biological systems can do, and there's a continuous effort to focus on that. So a lot of people are interested in computers that learn. I prefer to talk about a little bit higher goal. I'm interested in machine intelligence. I don't just want to do machine learning, machine intelligence. I'm interested in building machines that are truly intelligent and amazing in their capabilities. And I'm going to talk about that in this talk. Now, if you're going to build machine intelligence, there's two fundamental questions you have to ask. The first question is, what are the technologies or what are the principles by which you can build intelligent machines? When the computing era started, there were a lot of different ways people thought about building computers, but they settled in on one. And the same thing's going to happen here. What are the fundamental principles we're going to use for doing this? The second questions that they ask are, what are the applications that we can solve in the near term and in the long term? In the near term, we have to build exciting things that generate revenue, that generate profits, get interest in it. But you don't want to just solve some short-term problems. You want to be laying a foundation for the next 50 years. And therefore, you want to be thinking about the long-term applications as well. And I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to tell you about some of the stuff that's been going on. So the good news is that we have been making a lot of progress in this field, and I'm going to tell you about it. Now, if I were to answer the first question, what principles do you use to build intelligent machines? Well, if you notice the first word in the title of my talk, you probably know my answer. I believe that the proper way, the only way that's really going to play out here, is we have to first understand the principles by which the neocortex works. And once you understand those principles, then you can figure out how to apply them in a technology base. So I have been focusing on this in addition to the company I formed in Grok, which is about 9 years old. I also ran a neuroscience institute. I'm more of a neuroscientist than I am a computer scientist, but I spend a world in both worlds. Now, a couple of things about this. Why would we pick a brain? Maybe not everyone agrees with this, by the way. Some people feel like, well, you don't need to pay attention to brains at all. Well, first of all, one thing to think about is the brain is extremely flexible, the neocortex. And by the way, if you're not familiar with it, the neocortex is about 80% of the volume of your brain. It's the big wrinkly thing on top. It's a thin sheet of cells. But it's where all high-level vision and motor planning, language, touch, everything. You know, my neocortex is talking and yours is listening right now. So it's an extremely flexible organ. When you're born, your neocortex doesn't really know anything. It doesn't even know how to see or hear. It doesn't know about buildings or computers or language. It has to learn everything from scratch. And it's an incredibly flexible organ. The things that we do today, and just take this audience, we're talking about cloud computing and architectures and so on. These are things that we were not evolved to do, and yet the neocortex is able to do them. It's an incredibly flexible system. In fact, one can argue it's as close to a universal learning machine as there is. We do not know the limits of what it can learn yet, but clearly it can learn many, many things that it was not evolved to do. This is an incredibly important attribute that most machine learning technologies are not true. It's also an extremely robust system. Now, if you think about in a brain, it's made of very simple elements, neurons. They're very noisy, stochastic. They're not reliable. They die all the time. Neurons, synapses, dendrites are all very, very unreliable elements, and yet the system still behaves extremely well. And the neocortex can undergo great trauma, and it still performs, unlike other technologies. This is important if you're trying to build semiconductors or new technologies that are going to be inherently fault tolerant. So a lot of people, as I mentioned, get interested in brains because of that purpose. Okay, and finally I'll argue if we knew how the neocortex works, if it was all written down in a book and you could read it tomorrow, no one would be debating whether this is the right way to go. There would be a race on to build this stuff. And I'm actually going to tell you right now that that race is starting right about now, and it's going to get really heated up in the next few years. You'll probably be surprised how far along we are with this. But anyway, we'll see. Okay, I'm now going to switch into some basics about brains, what they do. And I'm going to tell you about a little bit how they work, and then I'm going to tell you about the applications involved with them. So the first thing is to think about, the neocortex, what is it? It's not a computer, it's a learning system. It's a type of memory system. As I said, when you're born, you have it. It's got structure, but it doesn't know anything. It interfaces to the world through your senses. Now, the retina is not a sense. It's a million sensors. It is an array of a million sensors. And there's a million sensory bits coming off the retina. They stream on axons into the brain. Your body senses, your somatic senses, the touch, there's about another million sensors. Again, an array. And your ears, or the cochlea, are about 30,000, another array. So you have these vast array of sensory organs. There's about a little bit over 2 to 3 million bits coming into the brain. It's happening in real time and fast. And from that, the neocortex, and only that, the neocortex has to build a model of the world. That's all it has to work with. And by the way, when it enters the brain, there's no difference of light and sound and touch. They don't exist. It's just patterns existing on these sensory streams. Now from this, the neocortex builds a model of the world, and from that model, it's making continuous predictions. It is detecting anomalies, and it's generating behaviors. Now the neocortex in the body interacts with the world as well. Of course, you're constantly moving, you're acting in the world. In fact, most of the changes that occur on your sensory organs are because of your own movements, because you're moving your eyes, your body, you're touching things, you're making sounds, and so on. And so you're constantly interacting with the world, and most of the way you learn about the world is through behavior. So what we say is the neocortex learns a sensory motor model of the world. It learns how the patterns on your sensory organs are going to behave under different conditions, under different motor behaviors. It's a very sophisticated model, but it's just a model. And we can understand how this model works. So I'm going to tell you a bit about it. didn't progress. There we go. I'm now going to give you sort of my 6 top principles for how the neocortex works. These are basic principles that apply to all mammals. Anybody who has a neocortex, from mouse to human. Okay, then the first one is it's an online learning system. Online means that there's no batch processing. We don't get to store the sensory data and then do some processing on it and then decide what to do with it. It comes in, we act upon it, we learn from it immediately, we go on to the next piece. It's an online learning system and streaming data. The second thing is it's actually a hierarchy. So even though it looks like a sheet of cells, and it's only 2 millimeters thick, it's very thin. But that sheet of cells is divided into regions, and those regions are connected together logically in a hierarchy. This is very well defined. And so it's as when information comes from the sensors, it goes into a set of regions, which then project to other regions and other regions, and the information flows back, goes up and down. Now, one of the most amazing things about this is that every region in the neocortex not only looks identical, but they're actually doing the same thing. They're all processing the information the same way. The way your brain hears is the same way it sees, is the same way it feels. That's an amazing discovery. There's an incredible amount of data to support this. It's a fact. And so it's a very universal algorithm. It doesn't really matter what the sensory array is sensing. It's going to work the same way. The third element here is that most of the memory in your neocortex, most of what it stores is sequence memory. It's memory of how things transition in time. If you want to recognize things in the world, like my speech, inference, it's a sequence in time, and the order matters. It's not just some spatial thing. It's a pattern in time. You have to learn how those patterns in time, you have to learn the English language, unfortunately, for me, you're going to have to do it. And if you want to, and when you touch things, it sequences in time, and as you move through the world, it sequences in time. Inference is all about time-based patterns. Similarly, when you want to generate motor behavior, like my speech, I'm playing back recorded patterns. Recorded. They're stored in my memory. So these are words I've spoken before and phrases I've spoken before. This speech, I've given very similar speeches before. And so I'm playing back these memories and generating these very complex patterns. It's stored in sequence memory. The patterns in the order matter. The fourth item here is that everywhere you look in the brain, you find cells, the neurons, and most of them are inactive, and only a small percentage are active. At any point in time, only a small percentage are active. It's a sparse activation. And this is true when you look at the neurons. It's true everywhere you look. Information coming from the sensory organs, it's sparse. We call it sparse distributed representations. This is not an efficiency thing. This is not an energy thing. It's a fundamental information property thing. I'm going to talk about it some more in a moment. And I'm going to argue that every intelligent machine is going to be based on sparse distributed representations. The fifth item here is that we used to think in the neocortex that there were some regions that generated motor behavior and some were input. So it was like, oh, the input comes in here, it comes over here, and then you'd behave. We now know that's not true. Every region in the neocortex has a motor output and a sensory part. Every region is doing sensory motor processing. Every region is learning a sensory motor model of the data it can see, and when you put them in a hierarchy, it does some amazing things. And then finally, there's an attentional mechanism which allows you to attend to parts of the input stream than others. I'm going to argue that these 6 principles are both necessary and sufficient for intelligence, whether it's machine intelligence or biological intelligence. As I mentioned before, every mammal, from the tree shrew or the mouse to the human, to the monkey, they all have all 6 principles. And this is whether you have a big neocortex or a teeny neocortex, these principles exist, and they're pretty fundamental. It doesn't mean we can't build really interesting things without all of them, which we're doing already. But this is what should be our goal, to understand all of this. Now, it turns out we understand 3 of these extremely well. We understand the nature of online learning. We understand the nature of sparse distributed representations, and we have a very good understanding how the brain forms sequence memories now. And we have we're beginning to have a good understanding of how hierarchy works and how sensory motor integration is combined together. And I'm going to delve into 2 of these topics a little bit. I'm going to talk about sparse distributed representations. That'll be the most technical part of the talk. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about sequence memory. And then I'm going to go show you how this stuff actually works and what we're doing with it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sparse distributed representations. The easiest way to understand sparse distributed representation, the language of the brain, is to compare it to computers. In computers, we use what are called dense representations. We take a word, 8 to 128 bits. We use all combinations in ones and zeros. That's why it's called dense. And if we want to represent something like the ASCII code, we would just say, here's 8 bits, and we say that's the letter M, for example, in this example. Now, if you look at that representation, the ones and zeros that constitute the ASCII M, it doesn't tell you anything about what M is. It's a purely arbitrary assignment. The bits don't mean anything. If I ask you what the third bit in that representation means, it means nothing. It's the combination as a whole tells you it's a letter M, but it doesn't tell you anything about what M is. If you wanted to know what M is, you have to look it up someplace, or what does it mean? Let's talk about sparse distributed representations. Here you have to have a minimum of several thousand bits. Now when I talk about bits, it's the same as neurons in the cortex, okay? So if I say it's a 1 bit, it's a neuron that's active, and if it's a 0 bit, it's a neuron that's inactive. You can make that connection. But we're talking about many thousands of bits. Most of them are zeros and a few ones. So a typical example that I'm going to use in my talk is you have 2,000 bits, 2% are active, you have 40 ones and 1,960 zeros. Now the key thing here is that the bits have semantic meaning. They're not arbitrary. They don't change rapidly. You have to learn. The brain learns what these meanings are, but they have semantic meaning. And when a representation is formed in the brain, the way it does it is it takes the top representative features, or the top representative semantic meanings, those bits, and those are the ones that are active. If I wanted to manually create a sparse distributed representation for like the letters of the alphabet, which we wouldn't do, we'd want to learn it. But if I wanted to do it, I might have bits to say, is this a vowel or a consonant? Is this, how does it sound? Does it have an A sound or an O sound or an U sound? Does it have a hard sound or fricative sound, and so on? We might have bits that represent, has a descender or ascender, is it written with a closed shape? We might have bits that say where the letter is in the alphabet, and other meanings of it. And then if I wanted to represent the letter M, I'd pick the top 40 attributes, and those are the bits that would be active. Now, there's some reasons you want to do this. And before I get into those, I'll tell you about those properties right now. There's some really amazing properties with sparse distributed representations. And I can only talk about a couple of them here. I'll give you some of the basic ones. But they're essential. The first one is if I wanted to compare two sparse distributed representations. So I have these two things. I can tell immediately how they're similar semantically and how they're different semantically. If they have the same location, has the same bit on, if they have a 1 in the same location, they're sharing semantic meaning. This will not happen by chance. In fact, even in my little example here, if I had 2,000 bits and 40 ones, the chances of even just having 5 bits in common by chance are very, very low. So this doesn't happen by chance. But very quickly, I can compare these two things and see how similar they are, and maybe I can substitute one for another. What if I wanted to store a pattern and then see if it occurred again? This is something that we do in computers, and it's something that brains do all the time. How would I do that? I don't save all 2,000 bits. I'm just going to save the locations of the 1 bits. So I might have a little indices, 40 little indices here. They point to the locations of the 1 bits. In the brain, these would be the connections between cells, between a neuron and another neuron. But now if I see those 1 bits in the right locations, I know I have the same pattern. I don't have to look at all of them. I just have to look at the 1 bits. Now what if I told you that you couldn't store all of them? You didn't have enough ability to do that. You're only going to be able to subsample. You're only going to be able to store a small subset. So maybe I'm going to say in this case you can only store the locations of 10 of the 1 bits. And you said, fine, so we'll do that. And then a new pattern comes in, and I said, did it match the one you saved? And you look at those 10, you say, yeah, I got 1s in the 10 locations. It's the same pattern. But then you might say, well, except the other 30 could be wrong, couldn't they? I mean, I'm only matching part of it. How do I make it the rest of it wrong? Well, first of all, I can tell you this. Statistically, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. But if it does happen, and you missed it, you've made a mistake for something that's semantically very similar to the thing you stored. It's not the same thing, but it's semantically very similar. And that's actually a desirable property. That allows us to generalize semantically. The following property is a little bit more complicated, and it's the last one I'm going to tell you about, but it's essential for how brains work. What if I took 10 sparse distributed representations, and I ORed them together? This is as technical as the talk going to get. And I OR them together. I now form a union of these. And so if I had my 2,000 bits, I now have about 400 bits active, about 20% of the bits would be active. Now I can't undo that. You can't say, well, what were the original 10? But I can do something almost as good. I can ask, oops, is a new one, here's a new SDR, a new sparse representation, is it one of the original 10? And they say, well, I'm going to tell you you can. You can just look for, do they have ones in the same locations? Now, you again might say, well, okay, what if you found a good match? But you might be picking some of the ones from one of the 10 and some of the ones from the other 10 and so on. Again, statistically extremely unlikely, but even if you did, you'd be making a semantic error. You'd be saying, I mean, not a semantic error, you're making an error for something that's semantically very similar to the thing you're looking for. Now, the brain uses this property a lot. When you make predictions about the world, you're making predictions of things that are going to happen. You don't predict one thing, you predict many things at the same time. You don't even know all the things you predict. You're not even conscious of them. But when something unusual happens, you know it. And also when you're generating behaviors, you have many behaviors you might do at the same time. And I won't get into it today, but they're stored in this way. This is an important property. If you don't remember anything else from my talk today, just remember sparse distributed representations. This is the key to unraveling machine intelligence and biological intelligence, and this is how computers are going to be based, or not computers, but intelligent machines are going to be based in the future. I'm now going to jump into the second thing. I'm going to talk about sequence memory, a little bit more neuroscience. I won't go into as much detail on how it exactly works, but I'll give you a flavor for it. Remember I said 90% of the memory in your neocortex is sequence memory, and it basically works on these properties. So let's just walk through a little neuroscience. There's a picture of a brain on the left, the neocortex. Again, it's very thin, about 2 millimeters thick. If I slice through that, in the second picture there, so that's a 2 millimeter slice, you'll see that these layers of cells, there's about 5 layers of cells everywhere you look in the neocortex. It doesn't matter if a monkey or a cat or a human, it's the same thing. If you look at, and all those layers are doing something similar in different contexts. So what's the similarity between them? If you look at any layer, what you'll see is a whole bunch of neurons that are packed in there very densely. And they are arranged in these little vertical mini columns. You can see that in this drawing in the middle there, these little columns of cells. And now if you looked at any one of those cells, that's the fourth image there, that's a picture of a real neuron. It's a very complex thing. It has a body, a cell body, but all the connections to it are on these dendrites, those branch-like structures are coming off of it. And a typical neuron has several thousand to 10,000 connections, and they're always on those branches. Now, those branches are not an extension of the cell body. The cell does not just sum them together. It turns out that the individual segments of the branches, the dendritic segments, are active processing elements. And the last picture here on the right shows you a picture of one of those. You can see the synapses aligned at about a micron apart. And what a section of a dendrite does, it acts like a coincidence detector. If a bunch of synapses become active at the same location at the same time, it has a very large effect on the cell body. If they were dispersed in time or dispersed on the dendritic tree, it has almost no effect on the cell body. So a neuron is a collection of coincidence detectors. It's an active processing element. We model these. This is a picture of one of our artificial neurons. Those colored dots are the synapses. We model the whole coincidence detection thing and how the dendrites work. We do models. In the middle there, you see a picture of one of our simulations with a whole bunch of neurons in layers and columns. I'm not going to go through how this works. You can read about it online. You can actually download the code for all the stuff I'm going to show you. But I'm just going to give you the results here because it takes a little while to understand how this whole thing works. We call this the cortical learning algorithm. We think it's a fundamental property throughout the neocortex. And what it does is essentially it takes an input, converts it into a sparse distributed representation. That's what this layer of cells is doing. It then learns the sequences of the sparse distributed representations, and it makes predictions and detects anomalies. All this is happening in a layer of cells. Now, it has some very nice properties. These are high-order sequences, so they can be very long sequences. They can have sequences that have common elements that repeat. They can have subsequences that are common in other sequences. It keeps them all, it doesn't get confused, it does the right thing. It's an online learning system, very high capacity. We don't really even know how to characterize it, but even on all of our simulations, we see in the most smallest things we build here are millions of transitions that can be learned in these things. They make multiple predictions at the same time, and they're fault tolerant. There's no single point of failure in these models. Any cell, neuron, synapse can fail, and the system works just fine. Okay, this, I believe, is a basic building block. It's a building block in the neocortex. It's a basic building block of machine intelligence. If you take a bunch of these, you put them in different layers, you break a region, you put regions in a hierarchy, etc. I'm now going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about applications. And there's more I could talk about in the neuroscience. There's more I could talk about the theory, but I'm just going to stop there. In fact, just in the last couple of months, we've made a huge amount of progress. I haven't even had a chance to write it up yet. But I want to talk about what's been going on, because we need to turn this into a technology we need to start doing things with. So I'm going to first talk about how we're using this in anomaly detection in data streams. And before I do that, I need to give you a little picture about the future of data. I'm sure you've been hearing some of this today, but this is how I would phrase this. In the today and in the past, this is how we've dealt with data. We have a bunch of sensors in the world. We collect the data. We put them in some data warehouse or some database. We store it. The second thing we do is look at the data. We have a lot of tools for looking and analyzing data, dashboards and things like that. And the third thing we do is we can build models of the data. So we take some analysts, we give them the data and say, your job is to build a model of this data. This paradigm is not going to scale. It already is not scaling. It's broken. The problem, it doesn't scale with two reasons. One is, as the number of data sources in the world gets very, very large, and there's already billions of data sources, and it's going to get much, much larger, you can't have people looking at it all, and you can't have people trying to build models of it. Not possible. The second thing is it doesn't scale well because the data we're collecting these days is becoming higher and higher velocity. And that's the area we focus on. But it's not uncommon to collect data every second, every few seconds, a minute, even less than a second. And you get higher velocity data, the half-life of the data, the value goes down. And so you don't have time to build models. You don't have time. You need a system that's constantly learning. You need a system that constantly builds new models on its own. That this is the only way to handle this onslaught of data. So that's the future. The future is we're going to stream data directly from sensors. We're not even going to put it in storage, or if you do, it's not the important part. You're going to do automated model creation. You're going to have a system that's continuously learning because the patterns in the data are constantly changing. And because you have these high velocity data streams, you're going to be doing a lot of finding temporal patterns as well as spatial patterns. From this, we're going to predict predictions, detect anomalies, and take actions. The whole thing has to be automated. So if you paid any attention to what I said earlier, this is exactly what brains do. It takes streams of data from lots of sensors, it builds models of them in real time, continuous learning online, takes actions and so on. So we said this is a great place to try this technology, so that's what we did. So we are using it, initially our first application is for anomaly detection, and we're using this using cortical principles, using the methodology I just told you earlier, the cortical learning algorithm. So here's essentially what we do. We have some machine, we have some metric that we're measuring off of it, we put it through an encoder which turns it into a sparse distributed representation. So we take any kind of number or category, there's a standard way of doing this. We put it through our CLA learning algorithm, and what you get out the other end is predictions. But we can take those predictions, turn them into anomalies, seeing how good the predictions are. This is a fairly sophisticated thing we do here, I won't go through it. But we do a series of steps looking at recent, how predictable the data stream has been in the recent past. And we can come up and tell you how unusual this data stream is. We can say with fair precision, given the past several weeks of data, how likely, what is the expectation that this system is in its current state, its spatial temporal state, that the patterns that it's seeing now are normal. We don't need to know what it is. We can just say how is it changed from recent past. We can do this fairly accurately. We can do this on multiple metrics, and we can combine them together, and we can give you a score. We can say how healthy is this system? How unusual is it? Is this something you should be concerned about? We've decided to apply, well, here's a couple examples. I'm going to start with a very simple one. On the top up here is, to give you a sense of what's going on, the top up here is the blue pattern is actually energy consumption in a building in Australia. It's a fairly regular pattern, you can see that one, so this one's fairly easy to see. And you can see coming along there's a point where it behaves differently. Now notice, the numbers never got out of range. There's no threshold that was broken here. This is just a different sort of pattern, a different sort of temporal pattern. This one's obvious to you. You can look at it. And the bottom line there, the red line, is the anomaly score that this technology can create. Basically, how unusual this is. And you see right away, right at the point where the blue line becomes unusual, so does our score. We say, well, we catch it. Something's different here. We can't say it's broken. We say it's just something's different. It's very different than it used to be. Here's another example, a little bit less obvious. The blue line, again, is data. This time it's coming off of a computer server. And you can see it's very spiky. In fact, it's very unpredictable. It's got a lot of stochastic behavior to it. But there's still some structure to it, and this technology picks that up. And so down below is sort of the score about how unusual, how unexpected is the data at this point in time, given past history. And you can see there, again, the red line catches that change. Now again, there's no thresholds that have been violated. You might say, oh, that's obvious, it had more spiking data, but we don't assume that. That's not what we're looking for. We're just looking for changes. Either the system becomes more predictable or less predictable, and we can detect that. We wrapped this all up in a product called Grok. Okay, that's what my company's doing now. Use my marketing tagline here. It's a breakthrough science for anomaly detection. We've decided to apply it initially to Amazon AWS customers. Perhaps someday we'll do Fujitsu. I just heard the cloud. You guys are rising stars in the cloud service. But we went after Amazon, and because it's a very simple way for us to get into the marketplace. So what we can do is we basically, in a very simple tool, you basically point it at your Amazon instances, and we start building models of all your instances. The data is streaming off of the computers, and we bring them the metrics in, so we start building models of them. And then we can tell you how unusual, given the last couple of weeks of data, how unusual that server or that instance or that service is. And we actually can do this all on a mobile device. We can show you, what we do is we can show you a ranking of the most anomalous instances. So you might be monitoring dozens or hundreds or even thousands of things. You can't be looking at it all. No dashboard's going to let you do that. But so right away, which ones are the most unusual? Which ones you might be concerned about? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. You can do all this on your phone. I can demonstrate it later. It's very cool. You can then drill down on one of these and say, well, what were the metrics that caused that unusual behavior? And then you can actually look at the metrics themselves, all very quickly on your mobile device. So very quickly, you can be looking at lots and lots of stuff and say, what's unusual? What should I be paying attention to now? What things should I be caring about? And you can see whether or not this is something you want to take care of. This system is continuously updating, so that if you watch the system, the data moves across every 5 minutes, and it's continuously learning. There's no set to this. Every new data point, it learns. It's online learning. So what one instance of a particular server type in another instance could have totally different behaviors. It learns them individually, and if they change over time, that's okay. But we're looking for rapid changes in how that system behaves. This is a very cool product. We've just started shipping it. Well, it's going to be on the Amazon Marketplace in a couple weeks. And I think it's going to be very, very exciting. But it shows the promise of sort of this lots of data, high speed, online learning, and we're using, in these models, every one of these has got this very sophisticated cortical model behind it. Every one of these metrics has got a 64,000 neuron layer model behind it. But we do the whole thing automatically. It's automated model creation. You just point and go, it's up and going. Okay, I'm going to switch to a different application now. One more thing I wanted to talk about this. This technology, this Grok technology, can be applied to any kind of data. It doesn't have to be applied to server data. Any stream of data that has the right sort of velocity and so on to it. So it can be applied to financial data, manufacturing, web sales, et cetera. So we've actually designed the system so you can feed in custom metrics from anything. And it'll be able to do the same thing. Sort of this mobile dashboard for huge amounts of data. Okay, I'm now going to talk to another one. It's a little bit more in the concept phase, but it's something that's very cool, and I think it really illustrates the power of this technology. This is based on the work of a company called CEPT, C-E-P-T. They're in Austria. These guys, there's two guys, well, there's more than that, but the two principals. They are they're natural language experts. And they read one of our white papers about this technology, and they read about the sparse distributed representations, and they said, oh my goodness, this is the solution to a lot of natural language problems. And so they did something very clever. This is what they did. They created a tool it goes out and scours the web. They mostly use Wikipedia. They go through all of Wikipedia. And they do they have a very clever way. What they do is they feed all these documents in, and what they get out is a bunch of sparse distributed representations, over 100,000 of them, each one representing a word or a phrase or a proper name. So you'll see in a moment how this works. These are about 16,000 bits. They have all the properties I mentioned earlier. The bits have semantic meaning. There's a sparse representation. They have all the properties that sparse distributed representations have. Now, whoops, I don't want to go there yet. These bits, even though they have semantic meaning, it's very hard to know exactly what they mean because it was learned. No one's assigned them. But you can get a sense. They're sort of grouped together by different types of properties. But no matter, you can do some very clever things with this. The first thing they did was the following. They said, okay, let's just do some operations on sparse distributed representations by themselves. So you can take something like the representation for the word apple. This is, again, just automatically generated. You have the sparse distributed representation for the word apple. You can subtract out the representation for the word fruit. What I mean by that is if there's a bit on in fruit that's also on an apple, then you turn off the one in apple. So you subtract out the semantic meanings of fruit from apple. And you're left with a new sparse distributed representation. This one has never been seen before. It's never been learned. It's never been seen. But what we can do is we can ask which of the 100,000 things is it semantically closest to? Which does it share the most bits with? And when you do this, and you can do this too, you can do this online, the answer you get is computer. Apple minus fruit equals a computer. The next most common ones were Macintosh, Microsoft, Mac, Linux, operating system, and so on. There's no right answer to this thing. But this is semantic processing, and it's very cool. The next thing we did, and this was done at a hackathon in the fall, one of our employees, Subutai Ahmad, did this for his hack. He did this in 2 hours. He said, okay, let's take a sequence of words, sequence of sparse distributed representation for words, and train them as a sequence through the CLA, through that cortical learning algorithm I talked about. So we're going to learn sequences. So we're going to feed it in 3-word sentences. A very simple, very simple idea. So these are some of the trainings he had. He created a series of 3-word sentences. The first word is an animal. The second word is either eats or likes. And the third is what that animal eats or likes. So elephant eats leaves, and elephant likes water, things like that. So he just created a bunch of these, not that many, I think less than 100. You fed them through the CLA. The CLA is learning these sequences. Now, we asked it to do something very interesting. We gave it, the first word we gave it was the word fox. Now, it had never seen the word fox. We had never trained it on anything about a fox. And we said, fox, then we fed it eats, and they said, what? What is the output? What is the CLA going to predict? Now, remember, fox is going to share bits with other animals, and we made the problem harder by having the eats and the likes. That was just to test it a little bit harder. So anyway, we fed in the phrase fox eats, and we asked, what's the prediction? If anyone's seen that viral video, what does the fox say? This is a pun on that. Okay, what does the fox eat? And the answer we got was, remember, it never knew anything about fox before. The answer we got was rodent. Fox eats rodents. This is cool. This, I believe, is the very first time anyone ever did language processing the way a brain does it, even in this very simple example. And it's really powerful. I think there's a whole bunch of applications here. I want to remind you that these word SDRs were created in unsupervised fashion, which is very important. We've exhibited semantic generalization both at the lexical level, meaning the word level, just by using SDRs, but we can also show it at the grammatic level using the sequence memory. And I believe there's lots of commercial applications for this, and if I didn't have anything else to do, I'd do that. But I got lots of other things to do. Okay, I'd just like to point out that the 2 examples I gave, our product called Grok and the CEPT example of the words, are using the exact same code base for the learning. Not one line was changed. And that code base for that CLA was not designed to do either one of these things. That was designed to model a fundamental property of the neocortex, independent of any particular sensory system. And you can see that we're getting close to sort of these principles of a universal learning system. That's, I think, an incredible statement for the power of these ways that the brain works. And I'm sure there are many other applications that can be built on this. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. I want to tell you what we're doing with this today. Where is it going forward? So we've created an open source project called NUPIC. And inside of NUPIC, we've placed the source code for the cortical learning algorithm, for the encoders, the support libraries, everything's up there. This is a single source tree. So the code that's up there is the exact same code that we use in our product. There's not 2 different versions. It's not delayed. You can see us releasing this. There's a community of people doing this. It's used by Grok. It's a GPL type of license. There's an active community. We started this last summer. I think it was July. It was the first we opened doors for this. This is a couple months old. I don't know what the numbers are now, but it's several hundred people on the mailing list. It's an active mailing list. I'm active on it as well. I mentioned here, I threw this in just to point out that there's an active community even outside of the NUPIC community. I want to mention point out a couple things here. IBM Research in Almaden has got a program underway. It's staffed and they're working on it very hard right now to build hardware implementations of these algorithms. And there's a program at DARPA that's being put together. It hasn't been approved yet, called the Cortical Processor, which was inspired by our work as well. And so there's people getting excited about this. We've had a couple hackathons. There's a bunch of education resources up on the web. You can read white papers. You can watch my talks like this. And that's the URL for the NUPIC open source project. Okay, so I'm going to review and then have a couple slides and wrap up. So in review, I've already argued that the neocortex is as close to a universal learning machine as we can imagine. I've argued that machine intelligence will be built on the principles of the neocortex. I've implied that this is going to happen sooner than you might have been thinking about. I've talked about the 6 basic principles that operate in the neocortex. Some are more depth than others, some we understand better than others, but there's progress being made, rapid progress. It's actually accelerating and understanding the rest of them. I've argued that the CLA, this cortical learning algorithm, is a building block both for the cortex and for machine intelligence. And I've talked about some near-term applications, language, anomaly detection. I didn't talk about robotics, but I think some cool things are going to happen there as well. And then finally, I've invited you to participate if anybody's interested in going to nementa.org and checking out the open source community. All right, I'm going to end up with 2 last slides here. I'm going to talk about the future of machine intelligence, where this is all going to go, and then I'm going to talk about why we want to do this. So the future of machine intelligence, there's 2 views about this. On the one hand, there's the sort of the pessimistic view. For those of you who don't know, these are all sci-fi references for bad things. Okay, these are all bad things that happened. The Matrix, the Terminator, and Skynet. I'm not a sci-fi guy, but my engineers tell me these are bad things. Then there's a very optimistic view. Maybe we're all going to have robot butlers like C-3PO, or we'll be playing games with Watson every day, or maybe we'll be putting these fun hats on our head and interacting in crazy ways with the world. I don't know. Or maybe the future is some ambiguous, and maybe it looks like it's going to be good, but it doesn't turn out to be so good. That's Hal from 2001. So I'll tell you what I know and what I don't know. Okay, here's some things that I know. These are absolutely definitely going to happen. I'd stake anything on it. First of all, we can build artificial brains that are faster and bigger than human brains. I'm not saying that's the goal. I'm not saying that's the only thing. We're going to build a lot of really cool stuff that's very small, but we can do this. Neurons are really slow. There's no question in my mind that we can build artificial brains that operate at 1,000,000 times faster than a neuron. A neuron can't really do anything less than 5 milliseconds. I think I'm out of time. That's what it's telling me. And we can build them bigger. We don't really know how big we can build these things yet. We don't have to stick to the senses that humans have. We can build any kind of sensory array. It doesn't really matter. The cortex and cortical principles don't really care about what the sensory array is, as long as there's a certain set of properties. We will be able to do fluid robotics. We're still in the dark ages of robotics. I can see how this is going to play out. And finally, our brains all have to be located in one spot. We have to put them all in our head. But artificial brains or machine intelligence doesn't have to be that way. It can be distributed around the world. We can have pieces of the hierarchy distributed and built into machines and into the infrastructure in some way. I think some really crazy stuff is going to happen here. Here's some things that might happen. I'm a little questionable about them. I don't know if we're actually going to build humanoid robots. It's certainly not a goal of mine. And if you wanted to build a humanoid robot, you'd have to build something that works like a human, has emotions like a human, lives a human life. I don't care. If it does happen, it'll happen a long time from now. But it's not a goal. That's not what we should be shooting for. Second thing, I don't think we're going to be able to, we probably are not going to be plugging in the brains to the back of their head into some computer all the time. I don't think so. I don't think this thing on the lower right is going to happen. But maybe it will. I'm not going to say it's possible. Here's some things that definitely are not going to happen. You're not going to be able to upload your brain to a computer. If you were hoping of that, and some people are really excited about this, you're just going to be disappointed. It's not going to happen. The people who argue for this just do not know how brains work, and they don't understand that the memory cannot be removed from the physical substrate at which it exists. We could copy things made in silicon, but you're not going to be able to copy things made of carbon and biological materials. We're not going to find evil robots waking up one day and taking over the world. This is science fiction. We do have to worry about things that are self-replicating, but we're not talking about building self-replication. Okay, last slide. Why create intelligent machines? Why would we care about doing this? There's 2 basic reasons you want to do this. Why I want to do it. I think you all want to do it. First of all, we can make our world better. We can live better. The same impact that computing technology has had over the last 70 years. And think about the impacts it's had on our world. And all the things we've been able to do, the safety and the health and improved medicine and so on. Those same level of impact is going to come about from intelligent machines. We can have that same level of improvement about making this a better place for us to live and a more safe and humane place. But there's another thing too. I get most excited about learning. I don't know about you, I want to know how everything works. I want to know the beginning and the end of the universe. I want to know why the laws of physics are the way they are. I want to know why brains work, how they work. And I think this is one of the most noble things we can do as humans, is to accrete knowledge, to learn more about the world. And there's building artificial brains is the absolute best way of doing that. We're going to be able to accelerate the acquisition of knowledge. Imagine creating physicists who never get tired, work 1,000,000 times faster, 24 hours a day. I mean, that is a reality that's going to happen sometime. Not tomorrow, not next year, but sometime. And it will allow us to explore the universe and understand it better. And I don't know where that'll take us, but that's where I want to be. So thank you very much for your time. That is exactly the amount of time I was supposed to use. Now, I'm happy to take questions if the organizers want me to take some questions. Okay, I will take a few questions, and I'll also be around a little bit later. I'll take this one right here, and I think they want you to use a microphone, although I'm willing to repeat the question if that's good enough for them. Oh, they'll run. Oh, you want me to pick up? Because this gentleman back here already has the mic. So
is that okay?
I don't get the pick. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. But I'd like to ask you to address something that you didn't include. I just started reading a very interesting and rather scary book called Our Final Invention, The End of the Human Era. And the author's premise is basically, as we move from AI, artificial intelligence, to AGI, artificial general intelligence, to ASI, artificial superintelligence, we need to program in friendliness, a requirement for friendliness to humans. Otherwise, there's no reason to assume that they're going to be friendly to us rather than viewing us as a collection of atoms that they can put to a higher use.
Do you know who the author was? I don't know that book.
I'm sorry, I don't, but he's a scientific guy, not a science fiction.
Well, I know some people who have described it. This goes back to, it's a great question. It goes back to the point I made earlier. Machine intelligence is not about building humans or sentient beings. It's about replicating the neocortex. The neocortex is just a system for modeling the world. It is not a living, breathing, having sex, eating thing. And that's what we're building. We're not, this gets back to the humanoid robots. No one I know wants to build that. You have to separate out the intelligence from the replication, evolving species. Just like when our motors are our muscles, but they don't make a sentient human being. Our neocortex is not a replicating thing. It's just a tool for learning, building a model of sensory data. So if someone tries to replicate a human with all the other parts of the brain, which we're not talking about, and I don't know if anyone's doing anything with, if you try to replicate all the other parts of the brain, the emotional parts, the part that says I need to survive, I need to eat and have sex and all this kind of stuff, and I need to replicate, yeah, then that would be dangerous. But no one's doing that, and I'm not going to do that, and it's a very different problem. And so we just have to separate out these two. As I mentioned earlier, the thing we need to worry about is not intelligence. We have to worry about self-replication. That is the thing to worry about. Anybody who builds anything that's self-replicating, regardless of whether it's intelligent or not, that should be dangerous. However, these are not self-replicating. These are just dumb brains, if you will. They're not embodied, living, breathing, evolving things. So unless someone goes and does that huge amount of effort to build another species, then they don't have to worry about it. If someone does that, then I would say we should talk to them. All right, I'm not allowed to pick, unless I can't. She's going to bring the mic over here. But then I'll get back to that guy if he still wants to. But she's got the mic.
Thanks. Hi, just a couple questions about the mapping of the wet brain to the dry brain, for lack of a better word. How do you deal with the notion of inhibition, which is a bit that's set but essentially negative? And how do you deal with scaling of interconnectivity? Because the connectivity factors in the brain are obviously vast.
Yeah, these are great questions, a little bit more detailed. First of all, I didn't talk about inhibition in the talk. But we model several inhibitionary processes. In fact, the whole idea of sparse distributed representations requires inhibition. We have inhibitions required in the columns. There's several different types of inhibitionary cells. So if you were asking technically, do we deal with that? I think about that a lot. So it's not worth talking about here because it's just embedded in the learning algorithms, if you will. The second one about connectivity, that's the big question. That's the elephant in the room, if you will. We have three-dimensional brains. The majority of the volume of your brain is white matter, which is wires. It's like, you remember the old craze? Did you see the cray downstairs? You know, the little thing, it's got big wires. Well, that's what brains are like. They're three-dimensional, and we have a thin layer of shells and lots of wiring. So it's all about connectivity, and the question is, how would we translate that into a silicon substrate or something like a silicon substrate. I think that's what your question was. And there's lots of people who have ideas about that. That's the guys at IBM are thinking about that. The guys, I didn't mention Sandia Labs as a project, are thinking about that. There's different approaches to this. One nice thing about it is that the vast majority of the connectivity in real brains and in artificial brains is local. It's the vast majority is local, it's continuously local, so it's distributed, and very small percent is long distance. So the general approach is you have a local architecture with a bus structure to deliver things further distance. But people, this is a real big question. There's a group at Seagate who's trying to implement our algorithms, and they're interested in doing it in multiple stacks in Flash. So they're going down in the hierarchy, down in silicon. Other people, as I said, photonics, other people looking at other techniques and bus structures. That is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges to building large artificial brains or artificial neurocortex is the connectivity. And again, it's very inspirational to go down looking downstairs in the exhibit and see when people tried to build memory for the first computers, all the stuff they did. It was incredibly hard. We're going to run through a little bit of a phase like that too, where we're trying to figure out what are the right substrates for building this in hardware. Very interesting challenge. Smart people are thinking about it, and they got ideas, they're not daunted by it. All right, I'll take one more question. Do you still want to have a question or no?
Well, Marcus from Hertz. I would have asked a very similar question to the first one that you got. I think you should read this book. It's James Barrett is the author. It just came out, Our Final Invention. If we have a brain with human capabilities 1,000,000 times faster, there's no way we can avoid self-replication. There's no way we can avoid it impacting.
All right. We'll just have to disagree about this. There's nothing about brains that implies self-replication. Nothing. There's absolutely nothing about it that implies self-replication. That is an entirely different process. Intelligence does not require self-replication. Emotional drive plus self-replication is a dangerous thing. Self-replication on its own, even just simple viruses, is a dangerous thing. Computer viruses are a dangerous thing. But these people who argue this don't understand this distinction. They don't understand that intelligence is not about those things. It's about it's a modeling process. It's not about emotional drive. And I'll read the book, but I've heard these arguments many times before. I'm concerned about anything. Anything I do, I want to make sure it's good and it's healthy and that we leave it. But I just do not see this as a problem. There are people who want to build self-replication things. Talk to them. But it's not going to happen on its own. All right, I'm going to hang around for a little bit. Thank you very much for your time.